Thom Hartmann here on the news. You need to know this. Even though bin Laden is dead, the war in Afghanistan continues on. Rather than a rapid drawdown of troops in July, as many had hoped for, U.S. officials are saying the president will likely only pull out about 5,000 of the 100,000 soldiers currently fighting in Afghanistan. Another 5,000 troops may be sent home at the end of the year, a small dent in our massive force. Meanwhile, things aren't going too well for our troops. U.S. casualties in Afghanistan are on the rise as insurgents are ramping up their use of improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. So far this year, 80 soldiers have been killed by roadside IEDs, and since the war began back in 2001, nearly 1,000 soldiers have died by way of these primitive explosives. The new military commander in charge of the counter-IED campaign admitted he expects casualties to continue to increase over the next few months as U.S. soldiers move increasingly deeply into Taliban strongholds. So far, $20 billion spent on technology to defend against IEDs is not working. And after 10 years of war, the fighting is worse now than it's ever been. So should we expect any different results from 10 years from now if we're still there? After bin Laden's death, the president has this small window to take a bold step and end our wars. And he should take advantage of it. It's time to bring our troops home now. Who's screwed? The impoverished poor. Not only does the Republican budget plan privatize Medicare, screwing over seniors, it also screws over poor people by cutting trillions of dollars out of Medicaid, which shows up in states as health care for poor people under various state-branded names. A new report by the Kaiser Family Foundation reveals just how harmful the Republican ideas for Medicaid will be for low-income Americans. Currently, there are more than 52 million Americans without health insurance, but under the Republican plan, that number will grow to nearly 100 million by dropping 44 million people off state insurance rolls. That's nearly one-third of Americans unable to access the health care system. We're talking about third-world countries here. Republicans think someone has to make sacrifices to allow for millionaires and billionaires to get another massive tax cuts, so why not let it be poor people? Meanwhile, Florida, Wisconsin, and a dozen other Republican-controlled states have passed or are trying to pass legislation to make it harder for poor people to vote. In the best of the rest of the news, there's another push for single-payer health care underway in Congress. In the Senate, Bernie Sanders introduced the American Health Security Act of 2011, a bill to create a Medicare for All program to ensure every single American. And Congressman Jim McDermott, a physician, introduced a companion bill in the House. Though the two bills, especially the one in the House, are unlikely to go anywhere, they do raise the debate again over why America is the only nation in the developed world that doesn't consider health care a basic right. Tennessee Republicans are trembling in fear over Muslims. That's why state lawmakers are poised to pass a bill outlawing Sunni Islamic laws similar to Jewish kosher laws if two people are practicing them together. The bill preserves an individual's personal right to practice his religion, but as soon as two or more people join in, then the new law says that a Sharia organization has been created, and these two Muslims could face a minimum of 15 years in prison for the way they eat or consult a religious leader to resolve a family dispute. We're just one wacky Republican legislator away from banning Islam altogether in America, a land founded on religious freedom by people escaping right-wing religious crazies in England in the 1600s. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and the whole bunch must be rolling over in their graves. Republicans in Florida are so obsessed with privatization, they're not privatizing their union-busting efforts. City of Winter Park just hired a firm of right-wing political consultants to fight 150 city workers who are trying to form a union. The consulting firm has ties to far-right organizations like the Ayn Rand Institute and the Federalist Society, and routinely boasts on their website that the labor movement is dead and that third-world sweatshops are good things. The motive here is pretty clear. The city is hiring anti-union thugs to screw their public workers. At least when Scott Walker was doing it in Wisconsin, he was doing it himself and not giving piles of money to some sketchy right-wing yahoos who claim they can bust unions. This week, the French National Assembly will likely pass a ban on hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, a method of getting oil by shooting toxic waste chemicals deep underground to break up oil inside shale rock. It gets gas and saves money on disposing of chemicals that used to be expensive to incinerate. Often when the toxic waste is pumped into the ground, though, and the gas it liberates seeps into the groundwater and contaminates groundwater in nearby communities. Oil companies in the U.S. have been fracking since the 90s. Ever seen shots from the movie Gasland where people can actually light their tap water on fire or discover pockets of cancers in rural areas? That's usually thanks to fracking, which is why the French environmental minister said it's not something we want to use in France. So keeping oil companies in line and protecting the safety of their citizens, that must be what a government that isn't completely bought and paid for by big oil actually does. Maybe we should give it a try. Crazy alert, doing the important work in Maine. So what's the more pressing issue for Republican state legislators in Maine? Healthcare for their citizens or whoopie pies? Sadly, the whoopie pies have won. Yes, the Republicans want to spend 52 days, nearly 7 times longer than they debated healthcare, debating whether or not the whoopie pie should be the main official state treat. And that's the way it is today, Wednesday, May 11th, 2011. I'm Thom Hartmann on the news.